Okay, so I've got this perspective view coming together, but the decal there, remember I've got to fix that using Photoshop to cut out the edges. So I want to show you a little bit of work in graphics programs following on from this, but before I go too far with those, I'm going to show you how to get things out of Revit with the right setup. So there are a few things to think about. With a plan view, the most important thing is that you know the scale that you're using and that you know what size that will make your drawing. And so the scale is fairly obvious. You can always see that in the view. You've got your scale set, and you've all done that before in your last project, I know, setting your views to different scales. But then how do you know how big that drawing is going to be on a particular page size? There's no easy way, just by looking, to tell that. You'll know if you've done a lot of hand drawing, you can easily work that out. If it's 1 to 100, and we know the width of this building, we know then by dividing that by 100 how big that would be at that scale. And maybe, well, are you all doing that? You're still doing hand drafting, I'm sure? No? Yeah, you've got to keep doing it. You should always have a drawing board set up and make sure that you're comfortable producing all of your drawings by hand, even though you probably won't be. You still should know how to do it. And then, okay, so if you're drawing by hand, you would measure across to work out the size of the building there, and so it's 12 metres, 729 millimetres, and so divided by 100, that's 127 millimetres, so about 12 centimetres across at 1 to 100. So it's not going to be very big at 1 to 100. That's what I was going to say. You're probably going to do it at 1 to 50 for interior design, and so I'm going to change that right away. Now, also like before, I'm going to duplicate this view so that I can have a view set up just for printing. So I'm going to right click on that view name, duplicate, and then which option here would you be using? Yeah, exactly. Duplicate with detailing is good. If you choose duplicate, all it'll do is take out things like annotation. So if you've drawn dimensions or text, it won't duplicate those. But if you choose duplicate with detailing, then it will. So normally duplicate with detailing is good. I'm actually going to choose duplicate because I've drawn some dimensions there that I don't want. So I'm going to use duplicate just so you can see the difference and why it's useful. Okay, so sometimes you basically want to start again from scratch with your annotation. That's why duplicate is used. So I'm going to go then and right click on my new view name and rename, and why not use a name that is going to work on the sheet. So ground floor plan might be a good one. If you've been wondering if you need to have the view name that shows in your project browser show up on the sheet, you don't. There's an option to have a different name on the sheet to the view name, and I'll show you that as well. Okay, so I've got my my name, and now I'm going to hide. So my grid lines, for example, can be hidden. We don't really need to see those on the plan, so hide in view category. My sections, I'll want to keep, so I want to have some sections, and the ones that I'm going to keep, like this one here, I'm going to make look a bit nicer so that they read well on the plan. So just by stretching the grips there to make it look a bit more presentable. And maybe I'll keep this one as well. So any sections you're going to keep, you should tidy up. And this is important because you don't want section lines sticking out and making the plan way bigger than it needs to be. So you want to get those in close to your to the edges of your drawing. And then any sections that you don't need to show on your sheets, you can just hide by hiding in view elements. Now for interiors projects, elevations are very rarely shown on the plan, so you can just hide the whole category for those. And then my reference planes, they won't print, but again I'm going to hide them just to make the view look cleaner. A few other little things. You can label in Revit. Now, you can do this in those other programs as well, InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, any of those you can do your labeling. But for just simple room labels, Revit isn't bad. But make sure you use the Annotate tab, not the Architecture tab. The Architecture tab has model text, which is basically 3D text. So never use that to do your labels. Use the text on the Annotate tab. There you've got a text tool, which is just regular text for things like labels. And then over in your properties, you'll see that you have set up a lot of different aerial sizes. Do you know, I'm pretty sure you'll have come across that Arial font before. Do you know what Arial is? Yeah. It is a Microsoft thing. It's like a poor man's Helvetica, essentially. So it's a bad rip-off of Helvetica. Unfortunately, you don't get Helvetica on Windows because Apple did a deal with the people who produced that font and stopped them from releasing it more widely. But you can pay for it and easily have it on any Windows platform. It's pretty simple actually, and it doesn't cost you that much. You might even find some free ones, but the ones you pay for are a lot nicer. And it's much nicer than Arial. Arial is a bit of an ordinary font. So if you go to Edit Type, then you can easily set up any other font. And there are some nice fonts that come with Windows. And so to do that, just go to Duplicate. Anyone know any nice fonts that are better than Arial that you might use? Yeah, Calibri's alright, yep. I don't mind Tahoma, Myriad, there are a few that are good. So, Times New Roman, yeah. Serif fonts, I don't know. They're good for emphasis, but otherwise, for things like this, I tend to avoid anything with a serif. So that's the tails on the end of the fonts. And it's important for design drawings, you really do need to think about all of these things like your fonts. I'll say Calibri, and I'm going to make it 3.5 mil. And so I'm going to set the size there, 3.5. You might think, well, why am I spending so much time with text when I'm really trying to get the scale? But you'll see if it's not obvious why scale and text go together in a second. So here I'll set that font, so we'll go with Calibri, that's not a bad one actually. Okay, so now I'm just going to do some room labels. I'm going to click to make a rectangle, click and drag. And I'll do another one over here. And then lounge. Right, so it's a bit hard to read because I don't have a background. So back to Edit Type, and you can turn the background to opaque if you prefer. And then, oops, sorry, just get that text across a bit. Okay, so I'll show you, if it's not clear, if I change the scale now back to 1 to 100, notice how the text changes size. So the text is always going to print the same size, and so if your drawing changes scale, relative to that drawing, the text needs to change size. Because really the plan there is getting bigger. If I make it 1 to 50, the plan's double in each direction. So the text, to print the same size, will appear smaller. But it's important that you realise it's always going to print 3.5 mil, and it's the plan that's actually changing size. And so it's not a bad idea to do your text for things like labels, like I said, in Revit. But then remember, if you're using a graphics program like even Photoshop, but definitely InDesign or Illustrator, you can do more text in there. Okay, so I've got my scale, I've got some text, and now it would be an option to print directly from here. If you've got an idea of the size, that is an option. But if you're not entirely comfortable with the size that will be on your page, it can really help you to make a sheet to place it. So I'm going to go down to Sheets All, right click, New Sheet, and you've all done this before, making new sheets. I can go to Load, and then you'll see in the title blocks folder here, so in the Revit library on the P drive, title blocks, I've made some blank sheets for you. Right, so they can be extremely useful with Revit. People forget that for design drawings, and presentation drawings especially, you often don't want a technical looking title block. And that's a common mistake people make when they're using Revit. They just use the stuff that's in the library, and that can often be far too technical for a design drawing. But it's still useful to have the page size set up with your sheet. And so by using a blank page, here I'm going to use A3 metric blank. What size are your final presentations going to be for Annalisa? A3, perfect. Okay, so I'll use A3 metric blank. Okay, so I've got a blank A3 page. Now I can go back to my project browser and find my ground floor plan. So I can drag that across, and I can see then how that's going to fit on an A3 page. And more importantly, I've located it on that page. So if I now take it into another program, it's always going to be in the same position. And that's really important when you do lots of rendering and overlays on top of your drawings. Otherwise you have to line it up again every time. So now I'm going to select that plan and even take the tag off. So the tags in Revit, even those are just too technical. You can do much nicer, cleaner tags. If you're not sure, have a look at the graphics you see in a lot of design magazines, and you'll see that they don't have these really technical looking tags. They've just got very clean labels, often all lowercase, with a nice font, and it's got more than enough description, but looks much more design oriented than these technical looking things. So I'm going to set that to no title in properties. Maybe just to give you a few other little tips. If you want that to look nicer, the graphics out of Revit are okay, but you can definitely improve on them by going to, well, let's just look at a few things. I'm going to turn shadows on. Shadows can be nice, but by default, they'll cast out of your building onto the ground there. You might not want that, so you can go to sun settings here and simply turn the ground plane off. Click OK, and now I've just got shadows inside the plan. Now, on my screen that actually looks much lighter, and I know on the projector there it looks really dark. So I'm going to go to graphic display options here by clicking on the little view cube, on the shading cube. And then there are a few options you can play with there. One is lighting, so I'm going to maybe turn the sun up, but also ambient light. I'm going to bring that light up. So notice how that's really lightened the drawing. I can also tone the shadows down. Then you have in shadows the option to use ambient shadows, which can add just an extra level of realism. It can be a little bit subtle in a plan, but they do make a difference. And then exposure is another one you can play with. So by just enabling that, it'll be on automatic exposure. And unfortunately it's got a grey background there, so I might need to, let's say, play with my, let's see, bring the ambient light up. No, so I'll switch to manual and I'll bring that brightness down. There we go. So that's got a white background, which can be really useful. Okay, so that can make it look better than just an ordinary Revit floor plan anyway. So a few things you can play around with there. And remember, that's all set up in the view. So if I go back to my sheet, it's all there. Okay, so now I'm just going to go to print to take that into another program. Okay, so remember, for everything except rendering, you should always use PDF. So if you go to print, and then print again, you need to use the Adobe PDF virtual printer in here. If you don't have that on your own computers, if you haven't got the Adobe suite, then you can find plenty of free PDF converters by searching online, and so make sure you know about those. Just going to set up here and choose A3, and then I'll just ask you, what's the most important setting here to get the size that I've set in the view? Which option do we need here to make sure that we're getting the scale? You should be doing this every time you print. You should be checking this one. So it's this one here, zoom. If it's not on that, fit to page, it's going to scale it. So make sure that's on zoom 100%. That means the 100% means that it's the size that you've set instead of changing it to the page you've set. So I'm going to preview this, and I shouldn't see the borders, but I can see there an A3 page, and it fits perfectly. So I'm going to click OK. And what am I going to call it? Thurlow House ground floor plan. Right, now notice how that's got shading. What if you don't want any shadows or shading? You want to do all of that in Photoshop? So another quick little option. If you select the view on the sheet, you can go to Activate View to get all of the view controls up again. Just like working in model space in AutoCAD. So there, I'm going to set it to hidden line, and I'm also going to turn shadows off. And then I will right click, deactivate view, and then go to print again. I'll check the preview just to be sure. Right, so there it is, it's exactly the same, except I've turned all of the shading off, both the shaded mode but also the shadows. That's really important. And I'm just going to click OK and give this a different name. We're going to call it floor plan lines. And so now I'm going to open both of those in Photoshop just to show you the difference. Okay, so if you haven't been doing much graphics work, you should start with Photoshop and then work your way up to InDesign and then Illustrator. Okay, so these are my two PDF files. I'll start with the shaded one. Here you shouldn't need to change anything, just click OK to accept the default settings. Okay, so it opens in Photoshop in a pretty similar way to what we saw in Revit. But I'll open the other one, just so you can see the difference. So this is the one with just the lines. And, no, that's good, and, sorry, that's not right. So let's just check what I've done there. I had ambient shadows still on. Yeah, okay, so that was a mistake. Okay, so I'll do that again. So I just have to close that file. It's still open. Okay, so let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so notice how it's got transparency. So that means where the checker pattern is, it's cut out automatically. Now that timber pattern unfortunately is coming in fill, so I'd have to go around that, but I just want to show you that anyway. Sometimes that can be really helpful if you just want the line work without the shading. I think probably at this stage you'll want to go for the ones that have the background. But you might see this come up by mistake. So if it happens, if you see the checker pattern, it's not a bad thing. And if you want to show it with a background, an easy way is to make a new layer, drag it to the bottom, and then just go to the edit menu, choose fill, and set it to white. And that can make it easier to look at. Okay, so let's do some more drawings at scale. So, that's what I'll do next. So I'll do a section now. And so I'm going to use the sections that I've set up. So I've got this section here. And so it's a bit of a mess. For a start, you generally don't need to show other section references in your section view, so you can just hide that whole category. Levels are useful, but again, the way Revit does them is a little bit too technical. So start by hiding any levels you don't need. So we don't really need a level for the entry to show in our section drawing. So I can just hide that by element. And I don't need a roof level either. We need it for modelling, but we don't need to show it in the drawing. So I'm going to hide that too. So you really only need to show levels for your main floor levels. And so that's going to be ground floor and level 1. That's all you should need. Now they also don't need to be as long as that, so I can stretch them right back closer to the building. And then, like I said, the tags are just a bit too technical, so you can always turn off the bubble, it's called, at the end just by clicking on that tick box. Okay, so I'm going to select my next level, and then again just turn the tick box off there, so all I'm left with is a line, so I know where the level is, and when I'm in my graphics program I can do the labels in a more clean graphical style there. So then all those other things like reference planes and grids can be hidden, so I'm just going to hide that whole category. Don't need to show lights either, so I'm going to hide that category too. Right, so much cleaner. Then don't forget about your crop region. So that's really important for section views. This box that goes around the section first needs to be visible. If you can't see it, it's probably not on, so you need to make sure that you click on that button down the bottom, which is hide and show crop region, so that you can see that box around your section. And that way you can bring it in as close as possible to the section without crossing over anything. So bring it right in, because you need that section view defined. So that box there sets up the size of the view. But then you'll usually want to hide it after that. So you need to first be able to see it so you can set the size, and then use that button again to hide it. Now, just like the plan view, I can set up the graphics, so the way I had them before with the with all of those those view properties. Okay, and so to save doing that over and over again, you can save those view properties. So I'm going to right click and go to create view template from view, and I'll call this ground, also not ground, so plan graphics click OK. Now I'm going to go to my section view again. Now it's really important you realise I didn't duplicate the section. It's good to duplicate views like plans because they're not being referenced by anything. But try to avoid duplicating views like sections. It'll really cause a lot of problems. So just change the view itself. Okay, so now I'm going to right click on my section view name, section 2, and then apply template properties. And so there, it's got view type filter. I'm going to set that to all, so then I can find plan graphics. Click OK. Okay, so that's set the same graphics I had for the plan in my section. Unfortunately, it's brought the light back because I had the lights showing in the plan view, so I can just go and hide those. I'll use the shortcut this time, which is V8. So there we are. So that's okay, but maybe the sun direction isn't quite right. So I'm going to go to sun settings, and here you can probably just switch between top left and top right for views like this. So that might be okay. My section there has come up again, so I'm going to hide that too. Okay, so that's ready to go onto a sheet. So just like before, I'll make a new sheet with the same blank A3 title block, and then drag my section onto the page. And again, set it to no title. Okay, so then I might want to have some isometric views or axonometric views set up to scale as well. So I'll just show you those. Okay, so I've got here a view that's already got a section box. I might start from scratch just to go over that again. So there we've got the default 3D view showing the whole building. So I'm going to right click on that and duplicate. And then I'll right click on my new view name and go to rename. I'm going to call this ground floor, and I'm going to use the proper name this time, axonometric. Okay, so do you know what makes it an axonometric? Yeah, the angle. Which angle? Yeah, you're looking from above, and then there's something that's always vertical. So you've got a vertical axis for anything in the Z direction. So this here, this axis, is always vertical. That's how you remember it's an axonometric, because that axis stays vertical no matter what. And that's what makes it different to an isometric. In an isometric, the angles are equal, but in an axonometric, you can have any angle for the other axes, but that Z-axis always has to be vertical. Okay, so I've got my angle, and now I want to cut away the things that I don't need using section box. And then I'll bring that down to cut away and show just the ground floor. Maybe orbit a bit to get a view from above. and then hide the section box. Okay, so it'd be nice to put a railing on there, but I don't need to go and do that right away, because remember, if you set the views up, as you make changes to the model, it's going to propagate through to all of your views. And that's something I think people maybe don't quite grasp at first, that you can do most of this work at an early stage. You don't need to have everything done before you set up your views and take it into Photoshop. Okay, so I've got my basic setup, but I might also have some shadows. Again, go into sun settings, turn off the ground plane, and then just play with the graphics to get some better lighting. Okay, so that's all right. Okay, so that's ready to go on the page. The scale for this is 1 to 100, so it'll be smaller than the section, but that's okay as long as I know. So the isometric views have a scale just like sections, plans and elevations. Let's place this to one side, get the section out of the way. And so, just like the other views, I can set the tag to no title, the viewport tag to no title. And again, think about doing the labelling in Photoshop or another program. Okay, so now I'm going to show you an option that I don't think you've seen before. I want to keep that angle the same no matter what. So I'm going to lock it with this button down here. You'll see next to the glasses there's an option to lock the view, save orientation and lock view, which means that view angle can't change, which is really important if you want to keep the same angle for later when you bring it into other programs. That's really helpful. Okay, so now I'm going to duplicate this view and rename my new view first floor or level 1 axonometric. I'm going to click on the little light bulb to show my section box again and bring that up higher so that I can then see my first floor layout. Okay, so that might be good. Maybe even a little bit higher. Now I'm getting some of the roof coming in there. That's okay. I can easily hide that just normally. And again, I'm going to hide all of my lights. Okay, so that view is ready to go. So I can then go back into the sheet. I'm going to drag this one down below. You'll see why in a second. And then I can place level 1 axonometric above. And notice how it should line up automatically. If you miss that, when you're dragging it across, you'll get a dashed line to show you when it's projecting from the view below. So that way your two views should line up across the levels. Set this one again to no title. Okay, so it's taking a minute for the graphics to update, but there we are. Okay, so that could also be brought into Photoshop same way. So just like the other drawing, I can print to PDF. Again, it will remain with the same settings, but if you open the file again, it's still worth checking these, especially the zoom, but also the page size. So Thurlow House section, like so. Okay, so if we open that in Photoshop, there's something going on with the masking there. That's a bit weird. Yeah, I might just make that one again. That's not right. Shouldn't do that. Okay, but does that make sense when you make these views? Other than that masking, which is a real error, I don't know what's happening there. Might just place that view on again. It's because they're overlapping. I see. Okay. Okay, no, I know what's happening actually. Okay, so remember before I said you need to check your crop region. So if you see something like that, check your crop region, and you can see there that's fairly large. So I'm going to bring that in closer to the view. So this is like your viewport in AutoCAD, and it's one of the most common issues people have with Revit, actually not thinking about that view size, and then having issues with the size of the view on the sheet. Yep, so you should be watching this, but yeah, if you're not, so that's the thing, if you're not at the stage where you've tried this, it's a bit difficult. But you should, like I said, you should be trying this sooner rather than later, instead of trying to get all, the common mistake people make is trying to do all of the design work and then do the presentation at the end, and you'll often be working on designs that, or elements that are not going to be seen in your final presentations, instead of focusing on what people are actually going to see, which is the stuff on the page. And yeah, again, you should be doing this sooner rather than later. So going to the layout again there, I'll put the ground, oh sorry, not the ground floor, the level 1 axo. There we go. Okay, so that should be right now. There we are. Okay, so that is graphically correct now, and in Photoshop, can open it and add to it. So I think actually, considering it seems like not many people have been using the graphics software, I might just show you how to do this in Photoshop. It's only A3, it's fine to do it in Photoshop. And the text tools are really easy to use in Photoshop, so just using the text tool here, I can add in things like the labels for levels. Okay, so instead of having the big tag that you get in Revit, just a number 1. And using the text tool there, you can easily edit your text. I don't know why it was set to that colour. Okay, so I want that to be black. And maybe it could be bigger than 12 point. We shouldn't be on a sheet like this. 12 point should be okay, but okay. And so then there we are. So I've just copied that, and so if you missed the, or if you haven't used the shortcut to copy before, it's Alt in Photoshop. Okay, so if I select or just click onto that text and then drag with Alt, that'll give me a copy. And then using the text tool, I can change that to a G. In lowercase g might even be nicer. So that's often all you want for your tags, not these big, long, overblown titles that you get with Revit. Okay, and it might be better to do most of the other labels with Photoshop as well. And if it's A3, you can even do your legends and all those other things, and basically all of your graphics in Photoshop. Okay, so don't worry about Illustrator or InDesign. So there you've used at scale, but then what about your perspectives? How have you been setting the size of your perspective views? Right, okay. So, okay, it's good to know how to set your size. So when you draw, how do you set the size of your perspectives? Don't know? Oh, okay. So when you're drawing by hand, how are you setting the size of your perspectives? Are you using your picture planes to project off your plan? Oh, right, so you just... Oh, right. See, computers, they let you cheat, and then yeah. It's good to start off that way, but after a while you want to be thinking about how to do things more precisely, because that's real. It's for design drawings, that is the main skill. And in architecture, we do this in first year. Everyone, in fact, in their first design subject, everyone has to do this. So you should be doing it before long. And so whenever you set up a perspective view, you should know how big the perspective needs to be. That's really important. Sometimes you can draw them bigger than they need to be if you need to get in more detail, and then you can reduce them. That's a good technique. But you should never be drawing it smaller than it needs to be and scaling it up, because they just look awful. Yeah, so that's fine. That's good if you're doing that. So, okay, so same in Revit. You need to know how big your perspective needs to be in the end. And it's quite easy. Once you know how, you just need to know why it's important. Otherwise, it can all seem a bit esoteric. So, okay, so I've got a perspective view here. How big do you think that should be on a page? Forget the fact that it's not a very good perspective. It's a 2-point that maybe is a bit off anyway. But let's just say I'm going to use it. If it was on needs to go on an A3 page, how big then would that view have to be, just roughly? Yeah, that's fine. Yep, so that's okay. So let's go for that size. So to get the size, it's not like other views, because other views have a scale: 1 to 100, 1 to 50, 1 to 20. Perspectives don't have a scale. So to get the size for a perspective view, you click onto the border and then size crop. So this is essential. When you set your perspective views, you need to know how to set the size, and you get that always in a perspective, size crop. And then, remember before we looked at using the cone of vision to change the field of view, to stretch the view out. That's the first option there, field of view. We're not doing that. We're just trying to change the overall size of the view. We don't want the field of view to change. So you've got to make sure you remember to change it to scale here. And then what was the size? It said 200 by 300. So the height there is on 195. So I'm going to make that 200. And notice if I click into the width box to change that, it's changed automatically. Because notice again, it says scale locked proportions. So what that's telling you is that it's going to scale it up and down and keep the same proportions for the width and the height. So if I change the height, the width will change automatically. If I change the width, let's make it 300, then the height's going to change automatically. So if you know you have a maximum size of 200 by 300, then you've got to set one of these values to the lowest of those numbers. Okay, so here the height's gone too high, 213, so I've got to set that back to 200, and then just live with the fact that the width will be less than 300. It'll be 281 if I want those proportions. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. It's zoomed in a bit, but otherwise the view hasn't changed. So I'm going to go and make another view. So new sheet again. And then drag my perspective onto that sheet. And it fits straight away because I know the size. Right, it's going to fit onto A3. And this doesn't just affect these shaded views, but also your rendering. So if you've been setting up your renders and then finding that when you set them to printer and then make it 300 dpi, that it's taking a long time, you can save yourselves a lot of time. If you know maybe this view only needs to take up a quarter of an A3 page, and quite often they will. If you're doing your final sheets in A3, you might have some sheets where you've got a few perspectives on the page. Are you doing that, or are you trying to get all your perspectives to take up a whole page? You are, or you are? Okay, yeah. Look, it's good to have some hero shots, but it's also good to have some more detailed shots where they don't need to be as big. And that's a common approach to layouts. I'll just quickly show you some layout stuff. Okay, so you can have lots of different ways of laying things out, but the perspectives don't always need to take up the whole page, essentially. So okay, so say this was only going to be a quarter of the page, then I can go back to size crop and then make it half the height. So again, scale lock proportions, and I'll make the height maybe a bit more than 100, actually maybe 120, slightly more than half. Okay, so back onto my page. Right, so I can fit 4 of those easily onto this page. And then notice when I go to render, it's a lot less pixels. So it's if you work it out, it's a quarter the pixels. So that's a quarter the render time that you'd have if you leave it on the initial size. And that's why sometimes at first the renders will take far longer than they need to, because you might be leaving the views too big. Even though you're doing all the same settings as I've got here, the initial view size you're starting with is much bigger. All right? So that can save you, hours of render time. Yeah. But you've got to know about this stuff, so that's why. So okay, so don't forget that one. So you've got the image size there, which determines the number of pixels based on your resolution. So resolution together with the size there in millimeters makes up that total pixel dimension. And you can set it all up in shaded even before you render. Okay, so that's it. And oh yeah, so then the final thing I said I'd show you how to get that decal cut out. This is just a little Photoshop thing to finish off. So I've been working with the layouts there, and like I was saying, for this project I'd suggest that you do just create your layouts in Photoshop if it's only A3. Anyone any idea why you might use InDesign or Illustrator for larger pages? Yeah? Kind of, yes, I'm on the right track. It's to do with pixels. Okay, so Photoshop works only with pixels. So if we zoom in here, you'll see that these nice crisp lines that we had in Revit have all been turned into pixels. Now, when you print them out on A3, they'll still look okay because it's got enough pixels in there. But think about what would happen if this was an A0 board. We'd have a huge sheet made up of pixels divided to a big grid, and that makes it a massive file. In InDesign or Illustrator, you won't have everything stored as pixels, you'll have lines, which are much easier to store and look better as well because they're clean no matter what resolution. So that's why generally for larger sheets you need to use those those different programs, not just Photoshop. But for smaller pages you can get away with doing all of your boards in Photoshop. So like I said, it is always working with pixels, Photoshop, but that's not a bad thing. Some images should always be pixels. And a good example of that is those images of rugs I just showed you. So let's get one. Here we go. Rugs, and so that's the one I used in the end, I think. Yep, that's it. It could be higher resolution, but I'll just go with this one. So what I want to do there is make a mask, and that's a common thing you'll use in Photoshop, but you'll see it's also, or Revit can also use these. So a mask basically is something that's often black and white that is going to cut out part of an image. So this is a very easy thing to start with in Photoshop. Using the magic wand there, I can select all the white. Then go then to Edit, Fill. Notice I'm not using the paint bucket because the paint bucket works a bit differently. I'm going to change that to black. Click OK. So I've filled in all the white stuff with black. Pretty simple. Now I'm going to go to Select, Inverse. So that's going to select everything except what I've just selected. So everything except the black. And then Edit, Fill, and set that to white. Okay, so I've made this image white where I want to see my rug and black where I don't want to see it. And that's it. I'm going to go Save As and save it into that folder with the same name, Mask, at the end. Now back in Revit, I'm going to select my decal, go to Edit Type, Edit the decal, and then you've got an option here for cutouts. So I'm going to choose Image File, Browse, and choose my mask file. There we are. And so that way you can have cutouts or shapes for your decals that aren't just rectangles. You can have any shape you like, and that's really useful for things like rugs. And just by having that uneven edge, it will give it a really organic look that will even work well for renders. Okay, you won't see that border there in the renders. If you want to take it out of these views, you can try hiding it. But actually, no, I don't think that'll work. But anyway, in your renders, you won't see that, so don't worry too much about it. Okay, so you can probably realise already, Photoshop is really important for decoration projects. I'd say at least as important as the CAD software as you go further with different decoration. And well, you've already got to do it for your window treatments. You'll need to use Photoshop, I'd say, rather than Revit for most of that. And you'll go further with it in your next subject, of course. But I'll probably finish up there unless anyone's got any questions about Photoshop or layouts. Yes, oh yeah, of course, yeah. That's all good? Great.